I'm here at St. Stephen's Catholic Church in Portland, Oregon, and today is the fourth day in our Novena to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. We continue our consideration of Dietrich von Hildebrand's book, The Heart, and chapters 4 and 5 speak of hypertrophy of the heart and atrophy of the heart. I think you'll find this very interesting. Let us begin then with chapter 4 on hypertrophy of the heart. And I'll read a little bit here. We often hear in sermons that what we feel does not matter. When speaking of contrition or of love of God and love of neighbor, a preacher will say, "You need not feel contrition or love, for real contrition and real love of God and neighbor are acts of the will." And in this context, one even hears the heart and its voice and all affective responses spoken of as being unimportant and even despicable. It has been common to say, feelings do not matter, love and contrition should not be interpreted sentimentally. Feelings and the heart are both classified as sentimental and thus excluded from the serious and important part of man's soul. Now, this approach is psychologically understandable, for affective attitudes cannot be freely engendered like acts of the will. So sometimes people might come to confession and say, "Well, Father, I don't feel sorry. I know I should be sorry, but I don't feel sorry." Or someone might, not be able to summon up that what we call perfect contrition. And yet we go to confession out of what's called attrition or imperfect contrition, where we come because we know that we need to, out of fear of hell, out of fear of punishment, or as an act of the will. We come to confession because we know we should. And we trust that after confession, that grace will help us to feel more contrite. So in this sense, he says that this is a pedagogical approach. This is done for pedagogical purposes or for teaching purposes. And there is the understandable desire to soothe and allay the conscience of a patient or of a penitent who might worry because he does not feel contrition or love of neighbor. His conscience is pacified through the assurance that if he will but make an act of the will and condemn his sins by turning away from them and resolving to sin no more, he can receive the sacrament of penance even if he does not feel sorrow. Oh, all right. Well, that's very good. Now, I'm going to look at a couple examples here, another couple examples. The intellect or the will should not try to supply what only the heart can give, nor should the heart arrogate the role of the intellect or will. When the heart exceeds its own domain and usurps roles it was never destined to play, it discredits affectivity and causes a general mistrust of itself, even in its own proper domain. If, for example, a man who wants to ascertain a fact does not consult his intellect, but instead claims that his heart tells him what the fact is, he has opened the door to all kinds of illusions. He has pressed his heart into a service it can never effectively render, and has allowed its improper use to stifle his intellect. Again, let us consider a man who wants to know whether or not something is morally objectionable. If he fails to consult his intellect but relies completely on his heart, he may either feel guilty when there really is no guilt, such as is the case with a scrupulous man, or he may feel pure and guiltless when he does things which are really wrong. In such cases, instead of letting his intellect decide whether a deed is morally wrong, he relies on his feeling guilt or feeling not guilty. He supposes this affective experience of feeling to be a univocal criterion for an objective fact, and such a supposition is definitely wrong. Okay, we have another example here. I once experienced a typical case of this illegitimate reliance on feelings. I was in Rome with a Russian convert, and when I asked him whether he had gone to Mass on Sunday, he answered, "No, But I did something much better yet. I visited the old Basilica of San Costanza. Upon entering this church, which looks like the Grail, I immediately felt completely purified. Well, neither the ineffable glorification of God through the sacrifice of Christ, nor the graces bestowed on us by assistance at Holy Mass, nor the commandment of the Church to go to Mass on Sunday counted for him. A pious feeling, a feeling of being purified, was considered more important than these three objective facts. Now, another type of falling prey to illusion is to confuse enthusiasm about a virtue with the possession of the virtue itself. Here's another example. For example, a man may experience an intense and genuine enthusiasm for the virtue of obedience or humility, and thereupon believe himself to be obedient or humble. He takes it for granted that his enthusiasm for obedience is a guarantee that he is able to practice it. The illusion here differs from the more primitive illusion mentioned earlier, which results mainly from a doubtful affective experience. For when a man confuses his feeling purified with really being purified, his feeling purified is already of doubtful genuineness. Here, however, the enthusiasm may be genuine, and is as such a first step which may lead to real obedience. It is even the basis for the acquisition of this virtue. But the illusion consists in mistaking the intensity of the enthusiasm for a sign that one already possesses the virtue one is enthusiastic about. Okay. Now, we continue. When making a firm, free decision, a person may be convinced that nothing will be able to shake his decision. Yet afterward he might revoke it because of fear or the pressure of other persons. Again, a man may declare that his faith is such that nothing could ever make him waver in it. Yet, in the hour of trial, he may lose his faith. Analogously, the lover swears that his love will never diminish, and then in time it weakens or even fades away. So when put to the test, that enthusiasm does not necessarily follow through. And yet, we continue here with von Hildebrand, and yet though this conviction of permanence is a necessary element of faith, of a solemn decision, and of love, the real Christian is simultaneously aware of his weakness and frailty, of his instability and lack of perseverance. He knows that he can fulfill what the inner word of his experience promises only with the help of God. I believe. Help my unbelief. Let these two cases suffice to show us the disorder which may result from a hypertrophy of the heart, that is, from an overuse, indeed a misuse, of affectivity. So hypertrophy of the heart would be an overuse of affectivity. The disorder arises because the heart, instead of cooperating with the intellect and the will, either attempts to replace what the intellect alone can rightly accomplish, or refuses to grant to the will its specific mission. It is not the degree of affectivity which is responsible for these perversions, but a disordered state of our soul. Affectivity can never be too intense as long as the cooperation of the heart, the will, and the intellect, willed by God, is not disturbed. So we have this relationship between our intellect, our will, and our affectivity. These have to cooperate. What I feel has to be based upon the truth. We spoke about that more in the last couple of days, that we might feel something that is not based upon the truth. We might be in a mood or in a state of depression that's not necessarily based on anything other than maybe something physical that we're feeling down, like maybe we're dehydrated or we need more sleep or something to that effect. But otherwise, our being depressed is not really based upon something that is true. So that's what we would call a psychic affectivity. psychic feelings. Right, we're going to contrast that now with what we have in chapter 5, which is called affective atrophy. So hypertrophy is an overuse, and an atrophy would be an underuse. So von Hildebrand writes, one type of crippled affectivity is due to a hypertrophy of the intellect, a kind of being imprisoned in a research spell. So we spoke about hypertrophy of the heart. Now we're speaking about hypertrophy of the intellect, an overuse of the intellect that ignores the heart. So these people remain always in some way spectators. When they see a gravely wounded man in an accident, instead of feeling compassion, instead of trying to help him, the main theme for them is to study his expression and to study his behavior. They are absorbed by an observing attitude. The event is largely a new and interesting occasion for them to gain knowledge. Well, a second type of crippled affectivity is to be found in the man who has an hypertrophy of pragmatic efficiency. And in his basic utilitarian approach, he finds every affective experience superfluous and a waste of time. The useful alone attracts him. In him, all tender affectivity is frustrated. He knows only energized affectivity, like ambition and anger. We recall now that the idea of that a temperamental artist or musician. Now, contemplation seems to him to be the height of uselessness, the most complete waste of time. And a third type of affective atrophy that is due to a hypertrophy of the will. And here the dwarfing of the affective sphere is generally something deliberate. We find it in the man who embodies the Kantian moral ideal. Every affective response is looked upon with suspicion as prejudicing the integrity of his moral standard, or at least as something unnecessary. The will purposely dismisses all affectivity and silences the heart. Now, this is not to say that the person doesn't feel anything. It's just that they make the decision that they're going to ignore those feelings. They make the decision. They willfully decide to silence the affectivity of the heart. We find it also in the Stoic, who strives for indifference and sees in the suppression of all affectivity the ultimate goal of the wise man. We find it again in the man who closes his heart, seals it off as it were, because he is afraid of affectivity, because of a misunderstood religious ideal. Either he sees all affectivity in the light of passion, or else he fears the risk involved in all affection and in every being enraptured. And so he strives to silence and ostracize his heart. Although this silencing of the heart on account of fear, based on a misunderstood religious ideal, is undoubtedly a grave self-mutilation, it is unfortunately often found also among pious people with excellent intentions. Now, in stressing here the role of the heart and the affective life, we in no way deny the basic role of knowledge, to which value perception belongs as a cognitive act, but value perception also presupposes a great and a deep heart. Otherwise, we perceive something to be of value by our intellect. Oh, well, this thing is of value because it costs a lot of money, or this thing is of value because it takes a lot of hard work to achieve it, and this thing is of value because of the precious blood. Our faith is of value because of the precious blood of Jesus, his passion, his suffering, his death, and all that he came to do and to conquer so that we could be saved from eternal death. That's of great value. We perceive that with our intellect, but that value, the perception of the value, also presupposes that we have a great and deep heart, that we appreciate all that goes in to procuring our salvation. One of the reasons why our parents would always, why your parents probably always made you finish up, at least if you weren't going to finish the food on your plate, at least you would finish, the meat or the fish, because a creature died for your meal. That you wouldn't waste that. It wouldn't go in the garbage. Somebody's life, or that animal's life would not be in vain because you threw it away into the garbage. So you have compassion in your heart, and you have knowledge in your mind. Now, it is in the affective sphere, in the heart, that the treasures of man's most individual life are stored. It is in the heart that the secret of a person is to be found. It is here that the most intimate word is spoken. And there we end chapter 5. We've had chapter 4 and chapter 5 today. And we will continue tomorrow with chapter 6, which is heartlessness. All right, it's time to pray. Let us go into the church and pray our Novena prayer. You can click on the link in the description below this video for a separate video where we'll pray together in the church. You can also click on a link below the description in the video to print out the Novena prayers. And I hope you will join me tomorrow for day 5 in our Novena of the Sacred Heart. And don't miss a day of prayer with us.